Netcasts you love.
From people you trust. This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Coding 101 is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com. It's time for Twit's annual audience survey, and we want to hear from you. Please visit twit.tv/survey and let us know what you think. It only takes a few minutes, and your anonymous feedback will help us make Twit even better. We thank you so much for your continued support. Twit.tv/survey.
This episode of Coding 101 is brought to you by lynda.com, the online learning platform with over 3,000 on-demand video courses to help you strengthen your business, technology, and creative skills. For our free 10-day trial, visit lynda.com/C101. That's lynda.com/C101. Today on Coding 101, we've got Carlos Souza from Code School. Hello and welcome to Coding 101. It's the Twitch show where we let you into the wonderful world of the Code Monkey/Code Warrior. I'm Father Robert Ballecer, the digital Jesuit, and joining me again is my fabulous super special guest co-host, Mr. Lou Maresca. Lou, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Padre.
Seriously, at some point we need to come up with a better name than super special guest co-host. We're waiting. We're waiting for authorization, but it's going to happen. How are things up in beautiful Redmond?
You know, fantastic today. The weather is actually exceptional, and I'm looking forward to some sun.
Absolutely. I'm hoping that we keep our sun down here in San Francisco. It's been fun. Sun, but some bitter cold. Now, a man who doesn't have to deal with bitter cold is Mr. Carlos Souza from Code School. Carlos, thank you for coming on to be our special guest today. Now, we bring you in because you will be the Code Warrior for a future episode, a future module of Coding 101, and we thought that our audience should get to know you. Welcome, and thank you for coming on to Coding 101.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here talking to you.
Now, I should mention, for all the people who are expecting a code-heavy episode, remember, we do this every once in a while. In fact, we've been doing about a month of this. Between modules where we do heavy coding, we like to have people on who have experience, who can share their experience of what it means to be a programmer, who can share their wisdom of how they got into the trade. And this is definitely one of the special ones. Carlos, I got to ask you, first of all, how did you become a programmer? What was it that brought you into this world?
I think it was part of just enjoying creating things. I've always enjoyed creating things, not necessarily programming related. I was into music before I was into programming. I was into art, drawing, just making new things out of existing things. And programming just came to me as part of my computer science degree that I was part of. And I learned it by necessity, and I ended up enjoying it. So I've been doing it for over a decade now.
Now, ending up enjoying it. I've heard this every once in a while whenever we've had these interviews. And typically it'll start off with a background of messing around with computer, maybe some hardware that leads into curiosity about the software, and then they find that the software is where they should be. In fact, we had a very good episode with Steve Gibson where he talked about his desire to have the foundational knowledge, not just to know how to put computers together, but to understand their inner workings. And that meant that he would understand the programming and the minutia of the electronics that went into it. What was it for you? I mean, of course, you talk about this desire, you talk about this bent towards the world of programming, but was there something in particular that just caught your eye and wouldn't let go?
It was never, it didn't start hardware for me. Even to this day, I don't like opening up computers and messing around with parts and electronics or any of that. I like the software part. I like solving problems at the algorithm kind of layer. And what actually drove me to start programming was basically like solving problems through code, just writing code, trying to tell a story through code, through a programming language, expressing myself through a programming language, and being able to solve my own problems and problems with others through software.
All right. Carlos, I have to establish your geek credentials here. Name your computer history. What did you start with, and what are you on now? And give us everything in between.
Right. I started out with the 386 computer, and that was when I was around 11 or 12 years old. And at the same time, I started playing around with HTML and CSS. So web design back in the day, had my GeoCities website with a huge URL that I could never remember, and just started going through the source code of the pages and trying to understand how markup worked and how browsers worked. And then I stopped for a very long time to devote my time to music and learn how to play the guitar and learn how to play music. And then I went back to programming many years later in college. And then I can't even remember a computer I had, but now I have a MacBook Pro like many other people have. But again, I'm not super tied into hardware or configuration. I just want something that works and is fast enough to run my programs, pretty much.
So, Carlos, what type of languages did you start out with? I know you said went back to college a little later on. Did you start out with like high-level languages, low-level languages? What kind of caught your interest?
It was always the higher-level languages because, like I said, I've never been into like hardware stuff, so I never needed that sort of granular control over the machine. It was always focused on making web applications. So my first language in college that I worked with was ASP, classic ASP, so sort of like Visual Basic for the web. And then in college, I was learning Java. So those were the two languages that I started my professional career with. And then shortly after, I moved more towards the open source community. So I switched ASP with PHP. And that's where I had my real eureka moment into programming, and most of my initial learning phase on how to make web apps was in PHP.
Great. One thing I was curious about the code school. So the whole tagline is "Learn by doing." Can you tell us a little bit about what code school is?
Yeah, absolutely. Code School is a school for learning mostly web technologies. And what we want to do in Code School is that we want to introduce people to various languages by showing them what's cool about those specific languages and technologies. So it turns out that when you're learning a new language, the chances of you giving up on it is on the very first couple of minutes, a couple of hours into said language, where you have to set up your environment, download all the tools, install everything on your local machine. And if you ever try to do that, you know things never go as planned, right? So what we wanted to do in Code School was to be able to skip all of that phase and have people try out the coolest and the most interesting aspects of each technology. So in Code School, everything you do is in the browser. So we teach you programming concepts, and then right after we teach you each concept, we give you a console-like input where you code the challenges in the browser. So you never have to download anything. You never have to struggle with installing or setting up anything. You actually get to try each programming language and programming environment inside of your browser. So that means you might want to try Objective-C and iPhone development from a Windows machine running Internet Explorer. Or you might want to try out Ruby on Rails without ever installing anything locally. Because we want to show you what's cool about those technologies so you get to decide whether or not you should invest more of your time into learning them.
Carlos, I'm going to drag you down into the mud with us. We've had this ongoing debate back and forth, and actually Chumley in the chat room represents it really well. Right now he's saying, listen, you're a programmer or you aren't. Tricks can be taught, but you can't tell a random person how to code anything. And this is one of those things that we've gone back and forth on, because Coding 101, this show, by its very nature, is a general introduction. We tell people right up that you're not going to become an expert programmer just by watching our modules. You can't. We can show you different languages. We can show you different tricks. We can show you some of the interesting things that we find. But that spark that you spoke of, that interest that draws you, it almost feels as if, yeah, you either have it or you don't. Either you can be a programmer or you can't. What's your stand on that? Because I go back and forth. You know, I don't want to sound elitist. I don't want to sound as if there are only the chosen few who can be programmers. But at the same time, I've seen people who have put a lot of time into learning programming and they just never really get it.
Yeah, that's exactly what I think, Padre. But I think maybe those people are doing it for the wrong reasons. Do you know what I mean? I think it's about figuring out why you're doing it, what drives you, what makes you stay up at night trying to understand, you know, a specific language, a specific framework. A lot of people go in for the money, right? They see, you know, the famous programmers or the famous people that, you know, build companies and make millions of dollars, and then that's their reason for trying to learn how to program. And personally, that is the wrong reason, right? If you're in it for the money, and I would say not just programming, just pretty much anything. If you're in it for the money, you're not going to stay for the long run, right? You're going to burn out. You're going to give up on the first couple of obstacles. I think it's a matter of figuring out why. Why do you want to do that? And once you do that, I do believe that everybody can become a programmer if you have the right motives behind it.
I love that. That's the why of programming. And you're right. It can't be about the money, because those are the people exactly I'm speaking of. The ones who say, oh, wow, you know what? Such and such an app just made X million of dollars this week. That's what I should do because I want to make money. And it just doesn't work. I mean, you may get some of the knowledge for programming. You may understand how to put syntax together, but if you don't have that underlying desire, it's just not going to last. Now, Lou, let me ask you this, because you work in a place with programmers. You are a lead developer. You tell them what to do. Do you see this? I mean, you must get a turnover. Do you see people who come in and they think they're going to do something awesome and they just don't have the fire, and eventually they have to leave?
Honestly, it's a very low percentage, from Microsoft at least, because the way that people that come in, they're out of college, they're looking for the job to really expand on their skills. The ones that are hired from the field, they normally are coming to, again, expand their skills because of the amount of resources here. So I think you don't get a lot of that here because people know that Microsoft's a huge corporation. They're not necessarily going to strike it rich right up front unless they work really hard and kind of expand themselves. So I think that's not really the case for most people. There are those people that do come in and say, oh, well, you know, I'm gonna get a whole bunch of stock and build a whole bunch of things, and then I'm gonna be out of here and I'm gonna do my own startup. That's normally not the case usually in these types of corporations.
All right. Carlos, has most of your teaching experience been limited to Code School and the web, or have you had in-classroom experience when you're actually face-to-face with people who are trying to learn the trade?
Oh, absolutely. For a very long time, ever since going back to college, when I realized that, and this is interesting because I've heard this from multiple places recently, you don't need to be an expert to teach. All you need is to be able to reach out to someone who's maybe one step behind you on something. If you're able to reach out to that person and bring them along with you and teach them a concept that perhaps you just learned a couple of minutes ago, you're a teacher. So I've been doing that since college, and I've been running meetup groups. I've been doing hackathons, coding dojo groups for a long time before we even started Code School.
It's funny that you mentioned that because when we Jesuits, we do this thing called Regency, and most of us get put into teaching a subject that we are not great at. And the moniker was, you just need to stay one chapter ahead of your students. And that's kind of true. I mean, if you understand that there's way more that you need to learn, you actually end up being a better teacher because you're more receptive and you actually listen to your students and you find out what they need. But going back to that example of the fact that you've had face-to-face along with online teaching, what is your philosophy of student? In other words, when you start forming someone to learn programming, be it whatever language it is, what are the things that you look for? I mean, what in your mind, what tells you that person's a good student, that person's a good student, this person needs work, this person can't make it?
I think it all comes down to motivation. You can't teach someone who doesn't want to learn. if that makes sense. So there's a lot of people that, again, come to code school forced to learn a subject, and then they end up not seeing the true value. And again, going back to something you said, it's not about just learning from one source. We don't expect people to come to code school and become experts on a specific subject. This is just an intro. At the same time, people shouldn't rely on a single book to become an expert or a single video screencast. They should, be able to watch everything that's out there, or as much as possible, and hear from different sources, and then figure out by themselves almost what is the way that works for them. So only a motivated person will be able to do that. Someone who's not motivated is just going to stop at the first obstacle.
Right. We're here with Carlos Souza from Code School. We're bringing him in as our code warrior on our next programming module, and we're going to continue to talk to him about the philosophy of programming, about what he thinks makes for a good teacher, what makes for a good student, and ultimately what makes for a good learning environment. But before we go on, let's go ahead and take a moment to thank the sponsor for this episode of Coding 101. We've been talking a lot about giving you an introduction, a taste into programming. But you need something once you get that taste. Once you find that hunger that we're talking about, once you find that desire, you need to be able to go to a place that can give you the step-by-step. Because we're not going to do it here on Coding 101. That's not what we're trying to do. We're just trying to introduce you to a bunch of different experiences, a bunch of different programming languages. Well, the place that we suggest you go to fill that hunger is lynda.com. Lynda.com is the place, at least here at the Twit TV Brick House, for knowledge on the internet. It's a repository. It's not just a place where you can learn. It's a great reference. And the subjects are basically everything. Do you want to learn a new computing language? You can do that there. Do you want to learn about business skills? You can do that. Do you want to learn about photography or videography or any of a number of subjects that they cover with experts? You can do that because Lynda knows how you learn. Now, some of the courses that I recommend on lynda.com are Up and Running with Java, Design Patterns in PHP, and HTML Essential Training. They also have 3 different courses on building a note-taking app, an Android version, an iOS version, and a Windows Phone version. That's something that we tried to do here in one of our modules, and they'll take you through the actual step-by-step, along with the assets so you can follow along at home. Now, each course will teach you how to create a complete mobile note-taking app from start to finish, and within hours, you'll have created a working app and learn the basics of developing for whatever platform you choose. Now, lynda.com just works for us, and that's why we use it again and again. And it's not just for programming. In fact, most of the folks here at the Twit TV Brick House don't program, but we all use Lynda because it is such a great reference. Right now, we've worked with a switchover from Mac using Final Cut for all of our video production to PCs with Adobe Premiere Pro. Well, lynda.com gives us that reference, and with their searchable transcripts, it means that our editors can look for a particular problem, a tool they can't find, or a filter that they need to apply, and it will go straight to the episode, to the section, to the time code that answers their question. Folks, lynda.com really is a resource that you should have in your tool bag. Now, with a lynda.com membership, you can watch and learn from top experts who are passionate about teaching. You can stream thousands of video courses on demand, and you can learn, this is important, on your own schedule. Learning happens when you're ready to learn. You don't want a tool that's going to push you until finally you give up. You want a tool that will let you learn at your own pace. You get to browse each course with those transcripts I just talked about so that you can find those just annoying problems that just won't go away. And you can download your tutorials and watch them on the go, including access on your iOS or Android device. You can create and save playlists of courses that you want to watch. It's like a Netflix queue for knowledge, to fill that knowledge hole. And you can customize your learning path or share with friends, colleagues, and team members. I use lynda.com every day, and I think you should too. Your lynda.com membership gives you unlimited access to training on hundreds of topics, all for one flat rate. Whether you're looking to become an expert, you're passionate about a hobby, or you just want to learn something new, I want you to visit lynda.com/C101 and sign up for your free 10-day trial. That's lynda.com/C101. And we thank Lynda for their support of Coding 101. We're back with Carlos Souza from Code School. Carlos, let's pull it forward a little bit into the present. I was perusing your GitHub site the other night, and you are incredibly heavily invested in Ruby and the framework Ruby on Rails. What is it? Well, what drew you to that language, that platform?
Happiness, programmer productivity, being able to prototype and at the same time build full stack web apps. I want to say easy and pretty much in an enjoyable fashion. I love Rails, have been working with it for the past maybe 6 years, and love contributing to it every now and then, whenever possible, whenever I see a bug or something in the documentation that could be improved or anything like that. So, yep.
So, Carlos, in you talk about working with Ruby and so on. What do you feel that are really kind of the strengths and weaknesses with Ruby? And why is it a good language to teach up front?
It's an expressive language. It's one of the few languages out there that were built thinking about the person writing the programs rather than the machines that would run the programs. So it's a language that was designed from the ground up to be an enjoyable language, an expressive language. So that's what I like about Ruby, and Rails pretty much just follows the same pattern. It's a framework that's meant to be enjoyable, and that's meant to include pretty much everything that most web applications do. So it's, yeah.
Well, so something that you said there that it really caught my ear. Ruby is a programming language that thinks of the programmers rather than the machines on which the programs run. What does that mean? Why do you feel that more than any other language, it's programmer-centric?
Well, I feel that way because that is the real reason behind it. I mean, the author of the language has said that many times, and the reason for that is that we read programs way more often than we write them, right? So the reason behind writing an expressive and a well-crafted, so to speak, software is that it can be maintained, right? Of course, it needs to run accordingly. It needs to get the job done, but at the same time, it needs to be maintained by not only the person that wrote it, but also by other people that will eventually join the team, right? And that is the main intent of the Ruby language, is to make it so people can read a program months or years after it's been written, and they can understand it and extend it accordingly.
So Carlos, one of the advantages I think with Ruby, I think a lot of people say, is around dynamic typing. And also Ruby itself is really easy to write unit tests with and so on, which it makes it really easy to maintain. But also one of the negative things that people say around Ruby is it is as dynamic typing, which means sometimes hard to refactor code, and even like you were just saying, to sometimes understand the code. So how do you kind of get beyond those things? Do you feel those are strengths and weaknesses of the language?
So to speak. I mean, it really depends on how you write your program, right? You could say that same thing about any other dynamic language out there, but they have their strengths as well. I think the what you mentioned about, you know, the dynamic language getting in the way of refactoring, I don't see it that way, because mostly so I don't use an IDE, I use a text editor, and the refactoring for me is equally the same if I was using, you know, a static language on IDE too. So I think if you follow certain best practices and certain principles of, you know, writing tests and documenting your code and maybe keeping track of code coverage on your tests and all of that, those techniques can help you when the time comes for things like refactoring. So I don't think it's yeah, I wouldn't not use Ruby because of those things, and there's a lot more people out there that feel the same. So,
gotcha. Yeah, and I think another strengths that I've seen with Ruby was around the fact that you can get going on it really quickly, a really quick onboarding process. You get moving right on it right away. But again, one of the other weaknesses that people talk about, let me know what you think, is do you feel that Ruby sometimes has performance issues, or not performance issues, but less performance than other languages like Java or even C# or some of these other kind of high-level languages?
Right, right. It is a fact that, depending on the benchmark, Ruby will perform suboptimally when compared to those languages. But at the same time, it's for very specific applications and for very specific benchmarks, right? For most of where it's used, say web apps, Ruby, the language, turns out not being the bottleneck of your web application. There's many other things that will eventually make your web app slow that do not involve the server-side language being used. So yeah, I want to say for the vast majority of the case where someone says this web app is low is not because of the server-side language that's running it.
Right. Carlos, there's something that you mentioned there that I think we could kind of tease a little bit. You don't use an IDE. You are a text editor programmer. You like having what Emacs? What do you use?
I use Vim mostly.
Of course. I mean, that's the only sane choice. And I just opened up a holy war. That's gonna be fantastic. But why do you do it that way? Because one of the things that we've done here on coding is we've shown both ways. We've shown how you could just use a text editor, you could use Notepad, you could use Vim, you could use Emacs, whatever it is. But then we show the strength of using an IDE, a developed IDE, and everything that brings with it. But the more experienced programmers I talk to, they kind of default back to not IDE. Why is that?
Right, and I think it's not just because Vim. I'm a big fan of just plain old text editors because I don't think that's the bottleneck when it comes to programming. I don't think typing is the bottleneck. I don't think IDE efficiency will make you a better programmer. It will make you a faster programming. I don't really believe in that. And I try to keep my tools, as minimal as possible. I'm a minimalistic when it comes to programming tools. So I'm pretty happy with using a plain text editor. Even within Vim, I don't use that many plugins or anything like that. And I think, yeah, it makes it easier for me to either switch between development environments or even sometimes to log in a remote machine that doesn't have a graphical user interface and program it in there. And I just try to keep my development tools as minimal as possible.
Okay, Carlos, let's jump into Ruby. I think you've made the case of why people should use it and why you use it. And of course, you have a lot of experience with Ruby and the framework of Rails. What would you say are the things that Ruby does or Rails does better than any other language? Why would you choose to do it? What project would come up and you'd say that's absolute something for Ruby and Ruby on Rails?
Any web application, unless you have a very specific requirement, which I can't think of any right now, you probably want to use Ruby on Rails. Unless your team is not familiar with the language, in that case, I would say use the tool that most of your existing team is familiar with. But I want to say that Rails is pretty much the only framework out there that is able to group all of the best practices in software development at the same time alongside with the conventions in web development with the most things that most web apps do. And Rails is able to combine that and offer that in the best way possible, alongside with its community that they have an amazing eager to help others. And also documentation. I think it is the one thing that makes Rails different and better than all the other tools out there.
Wow, that is a bold statement. So Rails is the one language that groups together all the best practices that we would want to see in a web development application framework.
The one toolbox, yes.
The one toolbox. Lou, would you be okay with that?
So I enjoy actually building Rails. I've built with Ruby on Rails for a while, actually. So I think they do have a really good tool set, and they do have a bunch of set of really good things. Like, for instance, for C# and those other languages out there, ASP.NET, they have, NuGet and have all these other kind of places where you can get code, and sometimes you don't necessarily know the quality of that code, but it's available to you. With Rails and Ruby on Rails, you actually get, from my experience, even though there's less of that, you do get a little bit more higher quality from those types of libraries and from those available things out there. And I do believe that kind of gets you up and going faster, and it will get you a little bit higher quality code from that aspect. So I wouldn't say it's the one and only toolbox, but I think it does have a higher quality bar when it comes to that toolbox.
Wow. Okay. Well, I didn't expect that, but that's good. Carlos, in just a few weeks here, we're going to be giving your module. In fact, we're going to be pre-recording the entire thing this coming Saturday. It's going to be offline, so you folks out in the chat room, you won't be able to see it. We got to keep some secrets here at the Twit TV network. But give people a little taste. What are you going to show them? By the time they're done with this introductory Ruby module, what will they know how to do?
Hopefully they'll know how to read Ruby applications. So we're going to start pretty slow pace with just Ruby, showing some of the cool syntax that Ruby has, some of the features that it has that might not be in other languages, and some of the stuff that's more commonly used in Rails. Then we're going to jump into Rails and start with a very basic web app, and then we'll start exploring some of these features, and eventually we will deploy this app to a production environment. So we're going to do exactly what perhaps a startup would do with its own product going live and into the industry. So.
Right. Okay, and perhaps you could give people some resources. Where can they go if they're intrigued, if they're piqued, and they want to be ready for when you come in with the module? Are there any resources that they can go to on the web to maybe whet their appetite, maybe find a couple of code examples? Of course, they're going to want to go to your GitHub. Actually, Brian, if you could show his GitHub, it's a fantastic repository of some just wonderful code, some assets that you can pull down and work with. But where else would you suggest?
Absolutely. So 2 websites that people can go to kind of get their feet wet. One of them is tryruby.org, which is a website, we try to make it very fun. It is now under the Code School brand. It wasn't started by us, but now it's maintained by us. So we try to give people an intro to what the Ruby language is and what they can expect to see in Ruby scripts. Then after they're done with that, and it should be very, 10 to 15 minutes, a very, very short intro to Ruby. Then they can go to railsforzombies.org.
I like that.
Which is, again, we try to make it fun and engaging and interactive. And it's kind of the same thing that they've done for the Ruby language, but now for the Rails framework. So in Rails for Zombies, we'll show them the most important parts of Rails and what we think are the things that make Rails special. And yeah, some of those things we're going to be going through in practice in our upcoming series that we're going to be recording. But if they want to start seeing what's up with this Rails thing, they could definitely start with railsforzombies.org. And both of those are free resources. So they don't have to pay for anything. They don't have to commit to anything. And again, what's most important, they don't have to install anything whatsoever in their local development environment. They can access it from, Google Chrome, Firefox, Internet Explorer, Safari, wherever they please.
I love this. This is the gamification of programming. I love this. This is great.
Yep.
Railsforzombies.com?
Railsforzombies.org.
.org. Oh, I know what I'm doing tonight. But Carlos Souza from Code School, thank you so very much for being with us. Again, we like to introduce the people who are going to be code warrioring, that's a word I just made up, future modules. So if people want to see Ruby, if they want to see Rails, they're definitely going to have to catch Coding 101 in a couple of weeks. We're going to pre-record all your episodes so they'll be ready to go. But I just want to thank you. Thank you for being on. Thank you for talking to our audience. Could you please tell the folks at home, the Coding 101 audience, where they can find you? This is your 60 seconds. Anything you want to recommend? Code School, your personal site, your Twitter account. Where do they find your work?
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure participating on this project. Looking forward to a series. If they want to learn more about stuff that we do here at Code School, codeschool.com. join in the website. It's free to register. About 30% of our content is free. So if you're not sure whether or not you should pay the subscription price, you can stick around for a little bit, try things out. Also, make sure you follow our Twitter account, twitter.com/codeschool. We're also on Facebook and Instagram and all the other social networks. If you want to reach out to me more specifically, you can send me an email, carlos@codeschool.com, or follow me on Twitter, twitter.com/Kaike, which you're seeing right now. And my personal website is probably up there too, csouza.me, that has links to all the other social networks like GitHub, Twitter, blog that sometimes I write stuff. And it's been a pleasure again. And I was super happy to know that you've been to Belém. And I want to talk to you about that.
We'll
in the
talk.
near future. Yeah.
Actually, I think I may be going back down there probably in about 4 months. So it'll be nice. And this time it's for pleasure rather than for work.
Nice. You're going to have a great time, I'm sure.
Carlos Souza from Code School. He will be our Ruby and Ruby on Rails code warrior. We thank you, sir, and we will see you in a future episode of Coding 101. Now, folks, that's not the end of the show. That's actually the beginning. It's weird. We're doing something different on Coding 101 now. Lou, first of all, I'm surprised that you agreed with him that Ruby is actually a good language. I don't know. I mean, I shouldn't be surprised because you're a real programmer, and real programmers see the value in every programming language. But I thought you might be throwing in some hate. So kudos. All right.
Never hate. Like I was just saying to you, does a builder really only know how to use a hammer? And if he's a good builder, obviously he's not going to know just how to use a hammer. And so there are other programming languages out there that are very useful. They're very easy to start with. They are even useful, much more useful on the server because you can get done tasks much quicker and much faster. And again, there's a lot of help out there on the web from open source to so standards and so on. And ASP.NET's a great language, and it has a lot of backing behind it. And now there's compilers that are out in the web, compiler as a service, and so on and so forth. But again, Ruby has the same. So I mean, there's strengths and weaknesses to all languages, and I think it's just whatever you need at the toolbox at the time.
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and jump into some of the news bits. What we typically do at the top of the show, we're going to do it now. The first one is, and I want to get your opinion on this. I was mucking around the web the other day, and I found out that Duocode 0.4, it's a beta, is now out. Now, it's a C# to JavaScript compiler. It's powered by Roslyn, and users can download a Duocode Visual Studio extension, which will install project templates that will pretty much get you started in turning any C# code into JavaScript. Now, Lou, maybe I can bring out the hate in here. Why would you do this?
So honestly, there's been some attempts at this before. In fact, there was an open source project called Script Sharp. And in fact, some of the internal Microsoft teams use this to build out very large web applications. And what it helps you do is it helps the developers build in a strongly typed, statically typed language like C#, and then compile it down to something that's not that way, JavaScript. And it's actually very useful, especially if you're looking to move some of the developers that are managed or native code developers into the web side, because they can build the code and they can see the output. But there are risks to doing this type of thing. And some of these projects, for instance, Script Sharp is no longer being maintained because I think the gentleman who started it is no longer here. But there are other ones, like there's one called Saltarelli. I think that's how you pronounce it. And that one is on top of Script Sharp. So it's an expansion on this. Those are both open source projects. Now, Duocode, I think it's not. So, but it's very useful. It's very useful because it brings people closer to the web code who might not have been there before.
Right. And I'm not going to make the mistake of dumping on JavaScript or I've never actually dumped on JavaScript. I've always offered a balanced view of it. But people get really upset when I do that. But there's Rorks in the chat room who's saying, well, of course, JavaScript will run in a browser and C# won't. But what we have talked about is JavaScript makes it very easy for you to do stupid things. That's actually the hallmark of a very powerful language. It really lets you do things that maybe you shouldn't do. Anytime I hear about some sort of extension or some sort of project template that will do transcription of code, in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking it's going to do all those things that I don't want it to do. And I don't really want that happening with JavaScript. Do you get that same kind of vibe?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail right on the head, because that's the number one risk with these types of things is you get a specific type of developer or coder who knows, like, let's say server-side coding, C#, he knows maybe Ruby on Rails. They know these types of things, and then they want to also become a front-end developer. And the way they do that is they work inside these special frameworks or these special compilers. And the risk behind that is they code exactly how they would for a managed or native type application server-side, and they expect for it to build really good or highly optimized JavaScript. And what they find out is you tend to have suboptimal performance. You have sometimes syntax problems and semantic issues. And so you run into issues. And so these types of things are risky because it makes people think, oh, I'm going to build a web app very easily. But then you build this web app and you find you have lots of problems you have to fix later on.
Right. Well, let me turn that back on you, because one of the big announcements that we brought up towards the start of this year was that Microsoft is basically open sourcing a large chunk of the .NET framework, and that now you can write in C# and you can transcribe to different languages. If you did that right, there would still be a lot of work. I mean, we like to talk about write once, compile many times, but you should still go over what it transcribes into. Yes? I mean, if we're going to take the same standard of not being really sure if we want JavaScript to be taken from C#, we should also be looking at language and frameworks like .NET to make sure that they're not doing something silly with security.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think things like the Google Web Toolkit and AtScript and TypeScript, these are all things that are much closer to the JavaScript and semantic and syntax, and they make it a little harder for you to make the mistakes of the higher level languages because they're much closer to that. But with, like you said, with C# and some of these other languages, even the Java, GWT, Google Web Toolkit that compiles down to JavaScript, these types of things, they're risky because they output JavaScript code and then people just expect it to just magically work. And the problem with that is sometimes it doesn't actually output what you expect. And
Right.
so that's where, you might spend double time sometimes on going back and verifying, running tests, runtime things, more unit testing, that kind of thing, to make sure that things that get outputted are correct and you're what you expected and will run optimally in your environment in all browsers than what you expect. Now, these other languages like ActScript and TypeScript, these things are optimized for the browser. That means that what they output, depending on the code that you write, will hopefully be optimized and as highly performant as they can make it. And so that's kind of the key, is these things are not necessarily the same goals.
Right. We got CT in the chat room who's saying, my programmer friend says that the era of web developers are over now that you can compile C to JavaScript. As a web developer, I disagree. And I think that actually encapsulates my thoughts on it, which is, yeah, it's nice that you have this option, but I don't think it means now you can just forget all other languages. And that's always one of those promises that we hear, that this is the last language you will ever have to learn, and it will compile into any other language in any other format on any other platform. And I'm actually at the point of my programming maturity where I just know that's never going to happen, right? I mean, we're never going to get to that point unless we all start using exactly the same platforms.
Exactly. I think every platform has its advantage. I mean, there's negatives and positives to advantage. Like, for instance, Node.js was supposed to bring the ability to have a web front-end developer, JavaScript developer, to the server side, right? So now they can write server-side components and know JavaScript and be able to do that. But that's, again, not the end-all. Like, there's a lot. Node.js is a very cool environment, and I actually do like using it, but it's not the end be all, right? It's just, there's just a toolbox and a very, very large, toolkit and a very, very large toolbox. So it's always gonna get better. I mean, there's always gonna be things that are coming out that do things better than the next.
And they keep adding tools to the toolbox, and it's bothering me. Stop it. All right, let's go into the second bit of news. This actually I really like. Again, I was just stumbling around the web the other night, and I found a page at publicapis.com that includes a huge database of publicly accessible APIs. Now, we have used APIs a lot in our coding modules. In fact, Santa's Little Helper relied on some APIs that weren't necessarily public. They were mostly public. But this is something that I think is a great resource for Coding 101 folk, because they should be able to take the lessons they got out of that last module and apply it to different services around the web. what about it, Lou? Is this the new web developer environment? We're just going to go from API to API?
I think so. I think it really helps kind of bring your apps to fruition. Like a lot of people who have, like for instance, I got an email recently about a person wanting to find flight data. You know, like for instance, how much flights cost, and then they can basically find the mistakes in the flight costs. So they wanted to be able to data mine that. So every day the costs came out, they could basically find out what a seat would cost to go from one place to another. And then when finally one of the airlines made a mistake and it made it very cheap, they would go and buy it right away. So they wanted to do that, but they couldn't find a free way to do that. And so these places will bring consumers closer, or developers closer to finding those APIs because they're marketplaces for, you know, public APIs. Not necessarily always free, but it also brings them closer. But, you know, sometimes it's just you got to go to find out, because the content providers don't always have a universal place that they put their APIs. Like for instance, in this specific instance, I gave him Google. I said go to Google because Google actually has an API for their, I think, ITA, I think their matrix. They have an external API that actually is free up to a specific amount of operations. So he went and used that. But again, that's not found on this public API because they didn't publish it. So I mean, there's great places to go, but it's not the end all for APIs that are available.
Lou Maresca, he's a senior lead developer over at Microsoft. He is our code warrior / super special guest co-host / just man about town. I love having you on my shows, Lou. And could you please tell the Twit TV Army where they can find you, where they can find your work?
Absolutely. So you can always find me, LouMM, on Twitter, LOUMM. And of course, all my daily work that I do during the day is crm.dynamics.com.
And you'll also find Lou all over the Twit TV network. In fact, of course, we always have him on This Week in Enterprise Tech. He's one of my favorite guests to have on that show. He's here on Coding 101 as our super special guest co-host, a title that may hopefully change at some point in the very near future. And you're also going to start finding him on Before You Buy on Fridays. That's right. We sent Lou a bunch of product, and we're going to get him into the product review fold. Folks, if you want something that's good, you got to find Lou Maresca. Lou MM, we thank you for being our super special guest co-host. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, Padre.
Now, folks, that's the end of this episode, but that doesn't have to be the end of your Coding 101 experience. You can find all of our shows, including our wildcard episodes and our programming modules, where we actually will show you programming. We'll show you different languages. We've done C#, we've done JavaScript, we've done Perl, we've done PHP. Just go to our show page at twit.tv/code or Coding 101. It all goes to the same place. Now, Coding 101, you may have noticed, has changed over the last couple of months. We've tried to give you what you want. And the way that you tell us what you want is by following me on Twitter at twitter.com/PadreSJ. That's at PadreSJ. I take the input from Twitter, and I take the input from our Google Plus group to find out what it is that you want to see in every episode of Coding 101. Is there a guest that you'd like to try to get on the show? Tell me there. Is there a topic or a language that you want covered? Tell me there. Is there something that you wish we just wouldn't do on the show? Well, that's also a great place to tell me. Again, it's the only way that we know what it is that you coders want to see. Also, don't forget that we do this show live every Monday at 2:30 p.m. Pacific time. Just go to live.twit.tv. Now, we were a little early today because of scheduling, but normally you'll find us at 2:30 on the dot. And if you come a little early, you'll see the pre-show, so you'll see what goes into making it, and you'll see the post-show, so you'll see what we do after we've wrapped the final shot, as well as all of the bloopers that go in the middle. Also, don't forget that we've got a live chat room. If you're going to watch us live, jump into irc.twit.tv, and you'll be able to ask me questions or give me comments during the show. In fact, I've got you right up there, and I pull in input from our audience as much as I possibly can. It's part of the experiment that is Twit TV. Finally, thanks to everyone who makes this show possible, to Lisa, to Leo, to Lou Maresca, my super special guest co-host, to you, our audience, and of course, to my good friend, co-host, TD, Doge enthusiast, Mr. Brian Burnett, Cranky Hippo. Brian, can you tell the folks where they can find you on Twit TV?
Well, actually, we do a lot of shows together now that I think about it. But you can find me doing BYB reviews on Friday. We also do a know-how show on Thursdays. And I was working on this earlier. This isn't what I'm doing for this week. But if you have an old Game Boy and the screen isn't working, I probably have a fix that will you don't have to worry about it anymore. Like Greg was gonna toss this in the garbage because the screen didn't work. I was like, no, we can save her. And those are the kind of things that we do on Know How. We play with software, we play with hardware, and you can follow me at cranky_hippo on Twitter.
You know, in a lot of ways, Coding 101 is like Know How, where it's just we're covering things that we want to talk about.
It's the thing, you know how
It's the thing show.
Carlos was talking about following your passion. Well, we kind of have ADD passion. We like a lot of different things, so we play with a lot of different things, and we hope that it's interesting along the way.
Yes, we do. Until next time, I'm Father Robert Ballecer. This has been Coding 101. End of line.